I guess this is it. Bye! What is masculinity and femininity, you ask? I have a hunch that this video will give you some answers. Stay tuned. I had this topic quite a while in my mind now. Although it's a polarizing subject, I will do my best in order to be as objective as possible to convey this peculiar message. The biggest issue I see when people giving a try to unveil the mystery for sexual energies is that delivery can become biased, and as soon as there's slight inclination to support any agenda, the discussion loses its credibility. Even though the terms are directly referring and usually assigned to males and females respectively, they can be descriptive of any of two genders or even sexual preferences. The reason why it's important to define these traits, if you must. We're sexual creatures, and most of our existence boils down, even if severely simplified, to procreation. Thus, it's in our nature to seek out our opposites within the sexual realm, and that's why distinctions have to exist. Because attraction at its core is about polarity. I mean, that's why it's called attraction, right? Just to clarify, when I say opposites, I refer to biological nature. Of course, intrinsically, we have to have similar values, similar goals, as well as interests in order to find a common ground. That is also a significant error that occurs during discussions about human nature. As a biological and sociological creature, we forget the spiritual part, the domain of being. As an example, virtue is considered to be a good deed, but depending on your living situation and your circumstances, you understand enough to be cautious against being used. Same goes for attraction. We should respect and treat each other with kindness, regardless of gender or sexual preference. But as soon as it comes to attraction, there has to be some kind of polarity in order to consider a meaningful pairing. Now that the prologue is out of the way, let's dive into it. Both masculine and feminine energies have their strengths and weaknesses. The key here is to be self-aware enough and balance the best from both sides. We will get into it later on.
Huge disclaimer here. Even though I mentioned this before, I want to make it crystal clear. Masculine doesn't necessarily refer to a straight heterosexual male, and feminine doesn't necessarily refer to a straight heterosexual female. Stick till the end of the video and I will give you some final words on what this is supposed to mean and how to handle this information. On a large scale, masculine energy comprises individualistic characteristics, whereas feminine energy keeps the community's best at its interest. That's why within politics, capitalistic views are generally assigned to masculinity, whereas socialistic views are promoted by femininity. So to be precise, masculinity is defined as being a leader, being first, hence the qualities. Note that these qualities are just some of what I could come up with, and several of them do overlap. Masculine energy is oftentimes driven by ego in order to accomplish something. That implies an individualistic point of view and thinking that alone is strength. Masculine energy sinks deep into creation and work and finds it to be everything in life. Masculinity lives for work and legacy. Of course, money has to be a fair portion of that hard work and morale. Masculine isn't afraid of conflicts and confrontations, speaks up for its integrity. Many masculine-dominated countries tend to give religion space to flourish. The energy have a need in faith and higher purpose. Masculinity loves solving problems and getting to the bottom with it, to understand how everything is constructed. As with the problem solving, consequently, things are of interest. That's why technology development is mostly preferred by the masculine. Also, it tends to be physical, hence the appreciation for outward beauty of feminine. Masculinity is seen as a dominant force. Its incentiveness can be explained by showing overly logical nature, again being interested in how things are built and created, many times blinding it to the nuances of being. Masculine sets goals and strives to accomplish them, leading to growth and practical wisdom. Goals are achieved by breaking barriers and rising after each failure. Those adversities build up a strong and stoic character. That's why it's cultivated with competition in order to have milestones and ways to measure the progress. Have I become better than yesterday? It goes hand in hand with ambitions, wanting to build an empire. Masculinity tends to be witty and sarcastic, why it's perceived being funny. Also, it usually is action-oriented and puts his words where its mouth is. Courage is one of the first things that comes to a mind when talking about masculine energy. facing fears and overcoming failures. Masculine is laid back and at the same time protective of those who matter. Being the primary provider, masculine is seen as a head of the family. Certainty is many times a very crucial aspect when it comes to attraction, where the feminine tests the masculine core. Masculinity is about choosing its own path and being rebellious in the face of conformity. Assertiveness comes from the same source as certainty, knowing what it wants and holding the ground. Aggressiveness is also associated with the masculinity. Masculine focuses on the content of communication, the logical. I hope you can see a red thread here. Analyze yourself and maybe see some of these qualities being a part of you. Now on to the feminine. Feminine energy is tender and more spiritual. It cares more about relationships and nurturing the bonds with people. Feminine cares for the community and seeks to pleasure its members' needs. It strives for equality, inclusiveness, and prefers overall quality of living. Working less hours makes up space to cultivate femininity. Feminine cares for environment and all livings. Tends to be more open-minded for new perspectives and is keen for negotiation. Feminine is a submissive energy, typically a follower, and has a need for a strong leader. Femininity has a good understanding for others' feelings, being a spokesperson for empathy. Humility is a great feminine trait, showing compassion for every living. Feminine is prone to attachment, investing emotional energy. Patience is good, but too much of it can be tricky. Feminine energy is sensitive, emotional, and communicative. Has a lot easier to express feelings and release mental tension. Uses more verbal and non-verbal communication compared to masculine. Feminine is outgoing and likes socializing. I was thinking about covering a topic on being introvert and extrovert. I can tell you now that introvert is masculine and extrovert is feminine. I got this request some weeks ago. Let me know in comments if there are more who are interested in this subject. Feminine can be insecure, shy, and indecisive. This is the consequence of submissiveness and preferring to follow. That's also why it is passive as well, taking a role of the supporter. Femininity shows obsessive tendencies, especially in combination with attachment. Very curious nature can overgrow to being nosy. Feminine tends to be agreeable, conforming to authorities, and that's why it's less involved in crime. Feminine, being opposite to masculine, tends to complain instead of taking action. Values context of communication, how it makes feminine feel. These are in some order of positivity and negativity, but are debatable dependent on the level of intensity. Balancing doesn't mean shifting genders. Both masculine and feminine have extremes which are not preferable for anyone. Like being too aggressive overgrows to being emotional, and it becomes a feminine tendency. Being too agreeable can be perceived as a naive characteristic. My personal transformation wouldn't be possible if I didn't hit rock bottom and understood that I have to let it out, process everything that has been felt, and become truthful with myself on an emotional level.
We all have both masculine and feminine parts and need to embrace who we are in order to find the fulfillment in life. I have talked before about relationships having a strong masculine female and a submissive feminine male, unlike the traditional family structures. Of course, more men will identify with masculine to a larger degree, and more women will identify with feminine. In my experience, and due to the old gender confusion that is happening in the world, just because a dude tries to attend to masculine normative doesn't mean that he's a really masculine guy. And same goes for girls. I have met many women who look very feminine on the outside, and as soon as you come in contact with them, you can sense a distinct masculine aura around them. This is not to judge anyone and put a label on them. Everyone should live their lives as it pleases them. The current course of sexual dynamics shows a noticeable dissatisfaction in the dating scene. I am more than sure it's a consequence of neglecting your own nature and jumping on a bandwagon for identity politics. In the era of Me Too, it's more than ever important to embrace the beauty of both energies. Wouldn't be dull and boring in sexless society with no contrast, no colors. Hussein out.